With question 81 of the Summa Theologia, we go into the power of sensuality. Now, we are moving our way through the treatise on human nature, the treatise on man, and we've covered the intellect. We've covered the appetites, the sensitive appetite, the will. There's going to be a whole lot more on the will. In fact, tomorrow I think we're going to be talking about the will in particular. But the sensuality, this has to do, typically people think of sensuality as having to do with sexuality, and that certainly is a part of it, but sensuality has to do with the passions. And I put this picture of the donuts there because we have a certain appetitive pull towards things that we desire. And it's one of the things that makes us very complicated creatures, because the angels don't have this. The angels don't desire donuts. The angels don't have sex or sexuality like we do. They don't even have gender, right? Because they don't have bodies. And so the animals, though, don't have free will or intellect or will. And so we're right there in the middle, and we got so much going on, and we're complicated creatures, but fascinating creatures nonetheless. And so when we talk about sensuality, there's going to be 3 articles in this question that go relatively quickly, and it's interesting. The first article says whether sensuality is only appetitive. Now, appetitive is to be distinguished from apprehensive, which is having to do with knowledge, epistemology, coming to know things. And appetitive has to do with desire, whether it be a sensitive desire or a intellectual desire of the will. And Thomas says the name sensuality seems to be taken from the sensual movement of which Augustine speaks, just as the name of a power is taken from its act. For instance, sight from seeing. Now, the sensual movement is an appetite following sensitive apprehension. Okay, so you can't be drawn to anything unless you first know what it is. Okay, you're not going to desire a hot fudge sundae or a banana split or a nap or you name it until you apprehend what it is. You got to know what it is. You got to see it, right? And then you desire it. So that's what he's getting at here. For the act of the apprehensive power is not so properly called a movement as the act of the appetite, since the operation of the apprehensive power is completed in the very fact that the thing apprehended is in the one who apprehends, right? So I apprehend this pen, it becomes a part of me. And this is very, very significant. Remember the passive intellect, the active intellect, the abstraction, the phantasms. There's going to be a whole lot more to say about that, but it becomes a part of me. It's in me. But if I desired this pen, then there's something good in the pen that I'm drawn to. So it takes me out of myself. While the operation of the appetitive power is completed in the fact that he who desires is born toward the thing desirable. Therefore, the operation of the apprehensive power is likened to rest, whereas the operation of the appetitive power is rather likened to movement, right? So if I apprehend the pen, that's rest. If I desire it, that's movement. Wherefore, by sensual movement, we understand the operation of the appetitive power, so that sensuality is the name of the sensitive appetite. All right, so there you go, sensitive appetite. Article 2, whether the sensitive appetite is divided into the irascible and the concupiscible as distinct powers. Now, I showed this picture of these 2 folks here because there's a lot going on in this picture. They're eating, they're drinking, they're laughing, there might be some, physical attraction between these 2. Most likely there is. And so there's a lot of passions, a lot of sensuality that is at play here. And so I thought it was an appropriate picture to show as we talk about these 2 different powers of sensuality. The sensitive appetite is one generic power and is called sensuality, but it is divided into 2 powers, which are species of the sensitive appetite, the irascible and the concupiscible. I will say that I've been teaching the Summa to high school kids for about 11 years now. And this is one of the more challenging things to teach, especially irascible. I understand concupiscible, no problem. Irascible, a little more challenging for me to teach, but I think I got it. So in order to make this clear, we must observe that in natural corruptible things, there is needed an inclination not only to the acquisition of what is suitable and the avoiding of what is harmful, but also to resistance against corruptive and contrary agencies which are a hindrance to the acquisition of what is suitable and the productive of harm. The productive of harm. So there's some things that we just want. We want a donut, we want a nap, we want whatever, a piece of pizza. That's concupiscible desire. There's some things we don't want. We don't want a tornado coming towards us, or a rattlesnake biting us, or being frightened. These are things we're repelled by. That's concupiscible. The irascible are the ones that guard us against those. It's like taking a step back, and there's going to be more explanation of this. For example, fire has a natural inclination not only to rise from a lower position, which is unsuitable to it, towards a higher position, which is suitable, but also to resist whatever destroys or hinders its action. So fire would resist wind if it's going to blow it out, or water if it's going to extinguish it, right? But its natural inclination is to rise, and its natural disinclination is to go down. So that's comparing the concupiscible and the irascible to fire. Therefore, since the sensitive appetite is an inclination following sensitive apprehension, as natural appetite is an inclination following the natural form, there must needs be in the sensitive part two appetitive powers, one through which the soul simply is inclined to seek what is suitable, donuts, pizza, according to the senses, and fly from what is harmful, tornadoes, rattlesnakes, things that are going to harm us. And this is called the concupiscible, the first one, the flying towards the good, away from what's considered evil. And another whereby an animal resists these attacks that hinder what is suitable and inflict harm, and this is called the irascible. Whence we say that its object is something arduous, because its tendency is to overcome and rise above obstacles. Examples of irascible passions would be hope and fear and despair and anger, right? So you hope for something that you would desire, but it's not right there, okay? Because I can hope for a pizza tonight, but there's not a pizza on my desk here, unfortunately. If there was a pizza right there, I would desire it because it's right there. But hope is something that's not present at the moment, so it's one step back. Or I could fear that there's a monster in that closet there, but if there actually was a monster that came out and attacked me, that would be concupiscible, right? And not irascible. Okay, this is clear also from the fact that the irascible is, as it were, the champion and defender of the concupiscible when it rises up against what hinders the acquisition of the suitable things that the concupiscible desires, or against what inflicts harm from which the concupiscible flies. And for this reason, all the passions of the irascible appetite rise from the passions of the concupiscible. Now, these examples help a lot and terminate in them. For instance, anger, which is an irascible passion, rises from sadness, which is a concupiscible, and having wrought vengeance terminates in joy. For this reason, also, the quarrels of animals are about things concupiscible, namely food and sex, as the philosopher says. Article 3, whether the irascible and concupiscible appetites obey reason. Now, this is very interesting because Thomas, in this part of the Summa, is going to take a very positive aspect to this. It's like, oh yeah, the irascible and the concupiscible, they obey reason. But we have to take into consideration what he's going to get at in a future question, and that is the fall of man, the original sin and concupiscence, which leads us to a tendency to sin. And because we are victims of original sin, ultimately our reason, these don't always follow reason, but more on that. That's why we need virtues. the virtues are going to be associated with this. In two ways, the irascible and concupiscible powers obey the higher part, in which are the intellect or reason and the will. First, as to reason, secondly, as to the will. They obey the reason in their own acts, because in other animals, the sensitive appetite is naturally moved by the estimative power. For instance, a sheep, esteeming the wolf to be an enemy, is afraid. In man, okay, so that's a concupiscible passion within the sheep. In man, the estimative power is replaced by the cognitive power, which is called by some the particular reason. Okay, we have intellect. We don't just react. We have intellect. We think it through, because it compares individual intentions. Wherefore, in man, the sensitive appetite is naturally moved by this particular reason, but this same particular reason is naturally guided and moved according to universal reason. Okay, now we're moving up a notch, not just our reason, but universal reason. Wherefore, in syllogistic matters, particular conclusions are drawn from universal propositions. Don't worry about that. That's complicated. Therefore, it is clear that the universal reason, which is God, directs the sensitive appetite. Isn't that interesting? The universal reason directs the sensitive appetite. When you want a donut, when you want a piece of pizza, you're being directed by the universal reason. That's what it says, which is divided into concupiscible and irascible. And this appetite obeys it. But because to draw particular conclusions from universal principles is not the work of the intellect as such, but of the reason, hence it is that the irascible and concupiscible are said to obey reason rather than to obey the intellect. Okay, the distinction between reason and intellect, we had that a couple of days ago. Anyone can experience this in himself, for by applying certain universal considerations, anger or fear or the like may be modified or excited. Okay, last paragraph. To the will also is the sensitive appetite subject to execution. The will and intellectual appetite, right? Which is accomplished by the motive power. For in other animals, movement follows at once the concupiscible and irrational appetites. Can you give us an example, Thomas? Yes, he will. For instance, the sheep, fearing the wolf, flees at once because it has no superior counteracting appetite. The sheep just does it, right? It has a sense. It sees the wolf. It's concupiscible fires up and it runs. On the contrary, man is not moved at once according to the irascible and concupiscible appetites. Although, if I saw a wolf, I think I would just run. But, that's interesting, though. Is there a thought process that goes on in a situation like this? Or do we just move? Thomas is saying there's a whole lot more going on with us than with the sheep. But he awaits the command of the will, which is the superior appetite. For wherever there is order among a number of motive powers, the second only moves by virtue of the first. So the concupiscible and the irascible are going to obey the will. Wherefore, the lower appetite is not sufficient to cause movement unless the higher appetite consents. And this is what the philosopher says, that the higher appetite moves the lower appetite as the higher sphere moves the lower. In this way, therefore, the irascible and concupiscible are subject to reason. But as I said, he's going to go later on in the Summa talking about with more in depth about the passions of the soul, that they don't always obey reason. They sometimes rebel because of the presence of original sin and concupiscence, not concupiscible, but concupiscence, which is the tendency that we have to disorder when it comes to the passions, the appetites, and that's where sin comes in. All right, that brings us to an end to question number 81 of the Summa Theologia. I hope you're enjoying this. I hope you're learning a lot about human nature. I hope it's helping you in your relationship to God. And I hope that you're not seeing the world the same anymore. Can you see a butterfly or a pizza or a donut or a fellow man in the same way after all of this? I hope not. If it's not changing the way you see the world, go back and watch all these videos again, because it should. Okay, I'm just kidding. But hopefully you're getting something out of it. God bless you. Thanks for journeying through the Summa with me, one question at a time. And tomorrow we'll be on to question 82 of the Summa Theologia. God bless you. St. Thomas Aquinas, pray for us.